Champ now. Yes, I didn't see him. What are you looking so sad about, Champ?
I'm surprised. I'm really insulted. That's not right, what you just said.
What do you mean, what I just said?
I'm getting a drink of water. I'm late getting home, but you talking. I said something about the greatest heavyweight champ, man. I'm a hometown man, and you talking about Joe Louis, man. Joe Louis wouldn't be nothing for me. Joe, I tell you, Joe, do you think you would have stood a chance with me?
Well played, man. One time during my career, I won a Formula One tour.
I would have been a bum compared to you.
What's happening, my people? It's Cass Sports again, back for another afternoon with the family. That's right. You know what time it is. If it's Monday through Friday, 2 p.m., it's the Boxtorian, bringing you all that boxing history. Boxing is the greatest sport of them all. That's why we love it. Can't get enough of it. Miss Cass, the drunk Irishman. Salute to everyone and welcome to another episode of Cass Sports, the Boxtorian. Today, battling past 40 rounds. That's the family today. It's Thursday. We are now getting late in this big week of boxing history. But battling past 40 rounds. We're going to talk about 4 fights today that occurred in the pre-15 round era, when rounds were still unlimited. We got one that went 42 rounds. We got one that went 49, one that went 75, and yes, one that went 110 rounds, okay? This fight lasted over 7 hours, and it started on Thursday night and ended on Friday morning. They changed referees after the 90th round and then still went 20 more rounds. Almost 2 complete fights by today's standards. Just 4 rounds short of 2 complete fights by today's standards. And then we're going to talk about why those guys were built so different back then. Okay? Appreciate you, Drunk Irishman. That is high praise there. Wow, I'm walking on air now. Put me in the same sentence with Hardline and Scrapbook Boxing. Wow. But appreciate you, Drunk Irishman. Yeah, we're going to talk about 4 fights before the 15-round era, when rounds were still unlimited. I believe the Queensberry rules had started, but you still couldn't. They had took a lot of the wrestling moves. You couldn't throw fighters down and that sort of thing anymore, but still was unlimited rounds. Okay, and we're going to talk about 4 of those fights today. And now let's get into our fight of the day. Okay, because that's going to be related to the unlimited round era. Let's get started with today's show. Now, today's fight of the day is going to be about a guy that fought in the era of unlimited rounds. He was called the Napoleon of the Ring, prize ring. I think his longest fight was like 64 rounds, but he's fought in that era. Okay? The Napoleon of the prize ring. That's what they called it. Okay, let's talk about it. Napoleon War Master was a terror to his foes, a general of generals, as everybody knows. And Jack McAuliffe, lightweight king, who many battles won, was tagged by his admirers, the Ring Napoleon. Ned Fleischer's opening poem in his 1944 biography on Jack McAuliffe ends, of course, with a little caveat. Unlike Bonaparte, McAuliffe never did meet his Waterloo, not even after 12 years as a professional, 7 of which were spent as lightweight champion. Did Jack ever meet his match? Despite engaging in some of the most brutal affairs ever witnessed in the ring, McAuliffe became one of the first post-bare knuckle champions to retire undefeated. Jack McAuliffe was born March 24, 1866 in Cork, Ireland, a child of the Emerald Isle. He wouldn't arrive on America's shore until 1870, when his father, who had served in the United States Army in the American Indian Wars, finally had enough money to bring his family overseas to Bangor, Maine. Not quite your exemplary student, McAuliffe was often at the receiving end of his teacher's cane. He also found himself in many street fights with his peers. And Jack quickly developed a reputation for his scrappiness. In fact, McAuliffe eventually became one of the most revered fighters among the sailors that inhabited the city of Bangor. And before he had turned 15 years old, he earned his first purse when he knocked out a much larger and older British sailor for a winner-take-all sum of $8. Not long after the McAuliffe family moved to the Williamsburg neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York, home to many Irish-American immigrants. As he had in Bangor, Jack made a name for himself with his fists, successfully deposing the neighborhood kingpin, Paddy Garrity, after some fierce confrontations. I've had some professional glove fights in which I took less punishment than in some of those hot mixes with Paddy Garrity, recalled McAuliffe, who shortly after that triumph struck one of his most important alliances, that being with neighbor and fellow Celt, Jack Dempsey, the non-pariah. That wasn't the D. Jack Dempsey of the 20s, the heavyweight champion. This was the middleweight Jack Dempsey, okay, who came first. Dempsey was 4 years older than McAuliffe, and in an interview with Ned Fleischer, the latter gave credit to Dempsey for teaching him all he knew about ringcraft. They worked together in an improvised gym in the 14th Ward of New York City, and McAuliffe would follow his friend and mentor into the professional game soon enough. But first, McAuliffe took a year to get some seasoning in the amateur game. As Fleischer notes in his biography, amateur boxing in the early 1880s was something very different from our conceptions of it today. This is Ned Fleischer, the founder of Ring Magazine, okay? And there was little regulation or supervision of any kind. And the fights, which often involved an unlimited number of rounds, were contested for pride more than anything else. While these fights may have observed the Marquis of Queensberry rules, in all other regards, they were a cheap bloodletting for the fans. In 1884, McAuliffe entered an amateur tournament staged by the future manager of John L. Sullivan, Billy Madden. He was drastically outsized by the other combatants, as the tournament weight limit was 140 pounds, while McAuliffe weighed roughly 112 pounds. Nevertheless, after a series of hard-fought fights, Jack emerged as the winner of the competition. And for the next year, he dominated in amateur tournaments before turning pro under the tutelage of Madden and Dempsey. There's a good shot of Jack, the Napoleon of the ring. Right there. Mike Rem, salute Mike in the building. Yeah, today, Mike, we are talking about some fights before, when rounds were still unlimited. I got 4 fights that went past 40 rounds. This is a Fighters of Day. Is about this guy called the Napoleon of the ring. He fought during that era. His longest fight was 64 rounds. Jack McAuliffe. Okay, salute Mike Grimm. He turned pro in 1884, dominated in the amateur ranks. Now, despite the non-pariah's efforts to hand off to his pal the lightweight crown, he had relinquished upon his move up to middleweight. This was a time when titles had to be won in the ring. As a result, Madden had McAuliffe embark on the kind of taking all comers pugilistic tour that would prove to be John L. Sullivan's ticket to success when the Boston Strong Boy could lick any son of a bitch in the house. In McAuliffe's case, one of those SOBs was Bull McCarthy, a longshoreman from Philadelphia, who had built a high reputation for himself in his dockside scraps. McAuliffe versus McCarthy proved a highly volatile situation, as the venue was packed with stevedores who had bet heavily on McCarthy. And they bet against Jack. But when McAuliffe knocked McCarthy out cold, it was not the longshoreman who made a fuss, but McCarthy's father, who got up and screamed, "You were hurt, my boy, you spalpeen." The distraught father then flung a chair onto the stage where the fight had taken place striking McAuliffe and causing him to collapse alongside his fallen opponent. Just as the curtain came down and the crowd went wild. Despite their lost wages, the longshoremen got their entertainment for the evening. And luckily for McAuliffe and Madden, Jack was not badly injured by the chair. Such was the fight game back in 1886. Another notable stop on this tour de Bruce involved a rematch with Jack Hooper, which took place outdoors and during weather that was so cold that the two pugilists were fighting not only to win, but to avoid hypothermia. Jack finally knocked Hooper out in round 17, perhaps saving the two from various illnesses. It was a miracle that any of us survived, said McAuliffe, who was nearly frostbitten from the freezing cold. Despite McAuliffe's success on the tour, his manager, Billy Madden, was more preoccupied with his young British heavyweight protege, Charlie Mitchell, a circumstance to which Jack grew impatient. Madden simply didn't have enough time to invest in McAuliffe, and as a result, Jack became his own manager. Nanette Fleischer notes in his book how by the 1930s and 40s, managers could oversee the careers of several boxers at a time. One wonders what he would think of today. Massive fight stables, you know. This manager here in the 1880s couldn't even manage two fighters. Wow. Nowadays, managers got what, 15, 20 of them, 30? This man couldn't manage two fighters. That's Harry Gilmore. We're going to get to Harry. Now free agent. McAuliffe challenged Billy Frazier, the Harvard University boxing coach, who is regarded as one of the best lightweights in the country. Now, upon arriving in Boston, McAuliffe played a few mind games on Frazier and his backer, Patsy Shepard, feigning that he was too fearful to get in the ring against the Harvard instructor, Shepard. And Frazier took the bait, each giving Jack $10 to stay the course and take part in a fight scheduled for 3 days later. Jack scored a knockout in round 21 to secure recognition as the lightweight champion of America. Less than 3 months later, McAuliffe fought for the world lightweight title against revered Canadian lightweight champion Harry Gilmore in what was regarded at the time as one of the most exciting encounters ever witnessed. Yeah, that's Harry up there on the screen now. Now, the fight was confined to a Lawrence, Massachusetts blacksmith shop that housed the ring enclosed on 3 sides by ropes and on the 4th by a brick wall. As one might expect, that wall proved a hazard with McAuliffe's thumb being broken and Gilmore possibly suffering a fractured skull from hitting the wall. But that didn't prevent the spectators from enjoying a ferocious battle, ending with a knockout for the American in round 28. McAuliffe stopped him in round 28. This man he claimed that he was afraid of. They had to pay him extra money to get in the ring with him. He faked them out. And while by this time, most regarded McAuliffe as the world champion, there was one notable pugilist who objected to that option, a bricklayer from Birmingham, England, by the name of Jim Carney. Carney was the British lightweight champion and highly feared on both sides of the Atlantic. And he got his chance to prove himself the true world champion on November 16th, 1887. Despite the fight garnering international attention, McAuliffe and Carney squared off in a dimly lit Massachusetts barn in order to avoid interference from local law enforcement. The result was a battle for the ages. You had to fight in a barn. Wow. Because, a lot of boxing was outlawed around that time, and they had to hide from the law. Yeah, there they are. So, McAuliffe and Carney duked it out for 74 tumultuous and foul-filled rounds. The fight lasting some 5 hours before the ring was overrun by a wild mob, forcing referee Frank Stevenson to rule the contest a draw. There were reports claiming that McAuliffe was being outclassed by Carney throughout the fight, but this was hotly disputed by those present, including ringside reporter A.D. Phillips, whom Ned Fleischer later interviewed. What was not disputed was that McAuliffe was fading badly against the ever-present Brit by the time the fight finally ended. From a scientific standpoint, Carney was outclassed, but he seemed to have it on McAuliffe in punching power, said Phillips, who recalled many details from the 5-hour scrap. However, by the 60th round, Phillips recounts that it was all downhill for McAuliffe, who was nearly knocked out in both the 70th and 74th round before the fight was stopped. Those sponsoring the event were worried the raucous, weapon-bearing mob would attract the attention of the police, which led to the fight being called before McAuliffe could be knocked out. There was plenty of controversy on both sides, with Carney's backers claiming the referee robbed their man of the fight to support American betting interests, and McAuliffe's backers claiming Carney's fouls, including the illegal use of his knees, should have resulted in his disqualification. Despite 74 rounds of grueling combat, a universally recognized lightweight champion was not crowned, and McAuliffe and Carney would never meet in the ring again. He had never had the rematch. Ended in a draw. Yep. McAuliffe enjoyed success for the next 4 years, with perhaps his tougher rival being Billy the Streeter Cyclone Meyer. Their first fight was another unsatisfying draw, but the two would fight again on perhaps one of the best fight cards in boxing history. The first fight of a 3-day carnival of champions that also featured John L. Sullivan versus James J. Corbett for the heavyweight championship, and George Dixon versus Jack Skelly for the bantamweight title. History would be made at the New Orleans Olympic Club when Corbett lifted the world title with a knockout of Sullivan, but McAuliffe also turned in one of his best performances. Unlike their first fight, Meyer took the fight to the champion straight away. The first 4 rounds featured tremendous back and forth action as the two exchanged knockdowns, with McAuliffe decking Meyer in the second round, and both hitting the deck in the tumultuous round 4. McAuliffe persevered and got the knockout victory in the 15th round, to which he celebrated the tune of a half-dozen beers in his corner with one of his seconds, the great Joe Chonsky. Yeah, 15 rounds. That was a short one there. For that time. 15 rounds. Wow. And then he fought Corbett. That's him and Corbett right there. I think I earned that drink, Joe, said McAuliffe in exultation. McAuliffe was also the chief second for John O'Sullivan in his title defense against Corbin. Well, that's John O'Sullivan. We're going to talk about that too. John O'Sullivan and Corbin. Yeah, that was one of the long. Yeah, he was chief second for John O'Sullivan in his title defense against Corbin 2 days later. And he orders his close friend, Dick Roach, to place his entire $10,000 purse on this man to retain the title. Some 300,000 smackers in today's money. He put $10,000 on the fight, his entire purse that he earned in his last fight, $300,000 today, right? Fortunately for the champion, Roach wisely held off on placing that wager and later returned McAuliffe's purse because Sullivan lost. He's lucky his man didn't make that bet. Wow. The man didn't make the bet and gave his money back to him. Wow. You see, after you passed me the dough, I got to thinking and went to have a chat with Corbin's handler, Billy Delaney. Roach told McAuliffe. After I heard Billy's spiel, I was convinced that Sullivan was going to lose, and he didn't bet his money. Wow. He could have kept that and told him he bet it. But that's what a friend is for, you know. But a lot of people would have told him, well, you lost that $10,000, worth $300,000 today. Now, the knockout over Maia was not only the pinnacle of McAuliffe's career, but also the beginning of his decline. In his last significant fight in August of 1894, McAuliffe, who was regarded as one of the most scientific boxers of his era, received a 10-round boxing lesson from defensive wizard young Griffo, who made the once great McAuliffe miss early and often. McAuliffe received what most present regarded as a gift decision, but while many in the crowd booed the outcome, they soon enough acknowledged the legendary career of Jack McAuliffe as he was now to retire unbeaten. Yes, they say he should have lost that last one, but whoever made the decision didn't think so, and he retired undefeated. There's young Griffo there, who he fought in his last fight. And everybody said McAuliffe really lost, but he got the decision. So, unlike other great champions who stuck in the fight game for far too long, McAuliffe knew when to call it quits. A stubborn gambler who lost most of his earnings after his career had ended, McAuliffe refused to step out of retirement to make a buck, even when promised $10,000 to face British champion Dick Burge. I know how much I have slipped, said McAuliffe. I'm not going in a ring to be licked by Burge or anyone else and have my friends lose money on me. I quit with a clean record. And with that, McAuliffe holds the rare distinction of being one of the few champions to retire unbeaten. McAuliffe was kneed, pivot punched, forced to box in freezing weather, and engaged in some of the most violent and grueling fights in ring history. But in every circumstance, he was crafty and gutsy enough to find a way to circumvent defeat. For his achievements and artistry inside the ring, Jack McAuliffe stands not only as a pioneer of boxing technique, but also as the proper starting point for the lightweight lineage. Okay, there's the fight of the day, Jack McAuliffe. Okay, so now we are going to, I got 4 fights that came from the era before round limit. 42, 49, 75, and 110. Okay? So let's talk about these fights. But first, let's talk about the era before, a little brief discussion about the era before round limits. Okay? Now, historically, a fight without round limits could last for hours, as demonstrated by the record-holding fight between Andy Bowen and Jack Burke, which went for 7 hours and 19 minutes. Okay, This fight started on Thursday night and ended on Friday morning. The modern boxing regulations impose limits on round duration and total number of rounds to protect the health of fighters. In the early days of the sport, particularly in the bare knuckle era, fights continued until a fighter was knocked out or could no longer continue. Now, fighters could deliberately go down to get a break, leading to long, drawn-out fights. Now, Bowen versus Burke, 1893. We're going to go into this one a little bit deeper in a minute. Bowen versus Burke, 1893. The longest glove fight in history was fought in New Orleans, Louisiana, between Andy Bowen and Jack Burke. It lasted 110 rounds, over 7 hours and 19 minutes, before being declared a no contest, as both fighters were too exhausted to continue. They had to change referees after the 90th round, and they still fought 20 more rounds. And like I said, it started on Friday and ended on started on Thursday night, ended Friday morning. Okay? That's how long that fight was. Technique. What's up, Technique? Yeah, we talking about some fights before the round limits came into effect. Technique. We got 4. One went 42, one went 49, one went 75, and one went 110. This was the one we just touched on briefly. We don't go into detail in a minute, right? Yeah, but it ended like in a no contest because both fighters were too exhausted to continue. They won 110 rounds. Kelly versus Smith, 1855. A bare knuckle fight in Australia between James Kelly and Jonathan Smith lasted 6 hours and 15 minutes before Smith quit. In bare knuckle fights, under the old London prize ring rules, a round ended when a fighter was knocked down or took a knee to get a break. Now, the transition from unlimited fights to the structured formats used today was a direct response to the brutality of 3 marathon fights and the serious risk to fighter safety. Now, the London prize ring rules. Under these rules, rounds did not have a time limit and only ended when a fighter was knocked down. Then the Queensberry rules, introduced in 1867. These rules set rounds at 3 minutes with a 1 minute rest period, establishing the foundation for modern, more structured boxing. Now the modern rules. For decades, professional championship fights were 15 rounds. After the Queensberry rules and they put the limits. For decades, they were 15 rounds. And the modern 12-round limit was widely adopted in the 1980s for safety reasons following the death of Korean boxer Duk Koo Kent. Okay, so let's look at some of these long fights now. First, we're going to look at, I think this is the 110-round fight will be first. Okay, yeah. Recalling the longest fight in boxing history, 110 rounds fought over 7 hours and 19 minutes. Okay, started on Thursday, ended on Friday. Yeah, that just was this was okay, yeah. Yeah, this was Andy Bowen and yeah, let's get into it. Yeah, did he already did it? I don't know which is which. But it's Andy Bowen and the guy he fought. Okay. Now talk about grueling with one big capital G, exclamation point. ruling. And not only for the two fighters, but for the referee, the judges, and the audience. Some fight fans, along with avid readers of the Guinness Book of Records, may be familiar with the names Andy Bowen and Jack Burke, as they may be familiar with the date of April 6, 1893. Because it was on this day, some 132 long years ago, that Burke and Bowen fought what is listed as the single longest recorded glove fight in boxing history. Yeah, it was longer fights in the bare knuckles era, but as far as when gloves, 110 rounds. Now, the two men met in New Orleans, Louisiana, home of Bowen, and the fight began at 9:15 p.m. that night, Thursday night, with the legalized violence lasting unimaginably until 4:34 a.m. Friday morning, the next day. Nobody who had entered the arena at the Olympic Club would ever be quite the same again upon exiting it. The two fighters fighting for both the lightweight championship of the South and a purse of a then huge $2,500. Yeah, $2,500 in 1880, right? The two fighters would experience a different kind of hell to any modern day boxer. Reports vary, but the fight is said to have been an exciting affair for a long while, actually. For around 30 rounds, the fight on Royal Street was a captivating affair. Both men hit the mat. Both men hit the floor, while the Texan Burke opened a cut above one of Bowen's eyes. Now, Bowen, the older man by a year at age 25, was a more experienced fighter, and of course, he was boxing at home. He was from Louisiana. Now, the large crowd who had paid an entrance fee of either $1 or $3 and comprised of a record 11,000 by some accounts, the actual number again being hard to nail down. Now, they enjoyed the spectacle for a while. By round 30, with the pace of the fight inevitably slowing, fans grew restless and restless and restless. Soon, the only three people interested in the fight seemed to be the two warriors and the referee. Some people in the audience had fallen asleep. The historic significance the fight would achieve lost on most who were present. But the fight was brutal in other ways than being far too long. Burke was almost knocked out in round 48, while he also suffered the disgusting pain of two forearms that were supposedly swollen to twice their size. Also, Burke's hands were broken, both of them. Reports say a piece of bone protruded from Burke's hand. Yet, on he fought, refusing to do what many members of the paying audience had done and quit. Yeah, some of the people in the audience was asleep. At this point, Bowen could have bailed out. The fight offered to him as being decided a draw, the person to be split down the middle. But Bowen said no way, and on the fight went. Burke's hands were said to have been injected with cocaine at this point. Burke, a clever boxer, who must have had nothing but an incredible fighting heart and an insane pain threshold, bobbed and weaved and feinted and slipped shots as he sought to run down the seemingly infinite clock. Bowen was unable to land a significant blow. On and on and on and on the fight went. By round 93, the referee was exhausted and had to be replaced. So they changed referees, but yet on the two fighters went. Changed referees in round 93, so they fought for 17 more rounds. After 93 rounds, they fought another entire fight, plus 2 rounds by today's standards, okay? On they went. In round 105, yes, round 105, Brown fell after missing with a punch. The momentum ended up with sending him crashing into the rival's elbow, jaw first. Down the stricken, shattered fighter went, only to get back up. Finally, mercifully, the fight was stopped after the conclusion of the 110th round. Neither man had anything left to fight with, and the officials at last did what they should have done hours ago, long hours ago, and that stopped the fight. And in the end, who won? No one did. The fight instead was scored a draw. At the 110 rounds, a draw. Okay? With dawn approaching the next morning, remember the fight started Thursday night, now it's Friday morning, with dawn approaching. This after the fight nights of all fight nights. Both unimaginably weary fighters were carried home, with Burke in far worse physical shape than Bowen. In fact, Bowen had enough strength to shout how he had been robbed. Okay. Certainly, Bowen was far less busted up than was Burke. Reports say Burke suffered the following: 2 broken hands, swollen forearms, a swollen stomach, puffy eyes and ears, and violent welts on his side and back. Burke was bedridden for weeks after the fight, while Bowen was quite astonishingly unmarked, aside from the cut above his eye that he had suffered so many hours previously. Of course, no fight should ever have been permitted to have lasted anything like as long as this one did, and the lesson was indeed learned. But both men fought on after that, yeah. Bowen tragically died in 1894 after hitting his head on a non-canvas floor in the 18th round of another war. So Bowen died during a fight. Burke passed away from a heart attack in 1913. Together, these two stupendously brave fighting men hold a quite unique, indeed untouchable place in boxing history. Yeah, untouchable. 110 rounds. Okay? So now, the next one is a fight that went 75 rounds. This one was the one between John O'Sullivan and Jake Kilrain. Okay? Let's get to that one. John O'Sullivan, Jake Kilrain. Oh yeah, there's Andy Bowen and Jack Burke right there. That was a fight we just talked about. I had the wrong image. Yeah, that's him. I still don't know which is which. Yeah, but yeah, I think Burke ended up in far worse shape than Bowen. He had broken both his hands like the 30th or 40th round and still fought like 70 more rounds. They say by the 30th or 40th round, they were injecting cocaine into his hands. So let's go to the 75 round fight. That's what we're talking about today. Battling past 40 rounds, 4 fights from the unlimited round era. Okay, let's get into that one. It is right there. Okay, this is John O'Sullivan and Jake Kilrain. The tale of Jake Kilrain versus John O'Sullivan. The final bare knuckle heavyweight title fight. Yeah, this was the last bare knuckle heavyweight championship fight right here. Yep, it sure was. It was just past 10 a.m. on July 8th, 1889, as the two combatants entered the makeshift ring on a farm in Richburg, Mississippi, but the rising sun had already set temperatures past 100 degrees. A crowd of nearly 3,000 had gathered in relative secret, traveling 100 miles on 3 trains from New Orleans under the cover of darkness the previous night. It is, this is this fight right here, okay? That's Jake right there, Jake Kilrain, one of the fighters. Now, one train contained the pugilists and their entourages. The 2 following trains carried the horde of ticket holders. Some had paid $15 for ringside seats. The rest paid $10 for general admission. They had come to witness an illegal activity, a bare knuckles fight, a sporting event deemed illegal in all 38 states in the country, United States at that time, including Mississippi, where Governor Robert Lowry had offered a $1,500 reward for the arrest of both fighters. Okay? Hence, the need for secrecy. Now, the ring had been erected the night before by a crew working under the light of torches. The fans who rode the trains through the night held tickets. They had no exact location, only destination and return. Yeah, the fans didn't even know where the fight was going to be at. They had to keep it secret because it was an illegal activity they were doing at that time. So the tickets just said destination and return. Okay? No fight in American history had ever created so much excitement. Newspapers had carried stories about the 2 fighters for months. And no fight like it would ever be seen again. For on July 8th, 1889, John L. Sullivan faced Jake Kilrain for the World Heavyweight title in what would be the last heavyweight championship held under London prize ring rules, or bare knuckles. More than a century later, boxing fans know Sullivan's name. John L. was America's first sports superstar. Kilrain, the son of Irish immigrants, he who was born on Long Island and grew up in Somerville, Massachusetts. Kilrain was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in Canastota in the inaugural class of 1990. In the biggest fight of his career, Kilrain squared off against the mighty Sullivan for 75 rounds under a broiling Mississippi sun as boxing passed from one era to another. Yeah, from the bare knuckles era to the glove era. On that day in Mississippi. Now, Kilrain was born John Joseph Killian, learned to fight as a teenager in the mills outside of Boston. He fought his first pro fight at the age of 19. He was 10 wins, no losses, 3 draws when he fought Mike Cleary to a draw at Madison Square Garden, at which time he caught the eye of Richard K. Fox. Okay? Now, Fox was the publisher of the National Police Gazette. He had an affection for sports, and the Gazette was one of the first newspapers in America to print a sports section. The Gazette was like what the Ring magazine is, well, what it used to be before Oscar and Turkey Ali Sheik got a hold of it. Yeah, the Gazette was the old Ring magazine when it was the Bible of boxing. Now, Fox was the editor of that magazine. Fox had a long-standing feud with Sullivan that dated back to a restaurant incident in which Sullivan refused Fox's invitation to his table and instead demanded that Fox come to him. Fox took an interest in Kilrain, and in the Gazette had proclaimed Kilrain the new heavyweight hope. In 1887, Fox challenged Sullivan to fight Kilrain. Now, the two sides negotiated the terms. Whether Sullivan actually agreed to the fight remains uncertain. But when Sullivan suddenly took on a fight with Paddy Cardiff, Fox was incensed. Fox claimed Kilrain was now the heavyweight champion due to Sullivan's forfeit. Fox commissioned the Police Gazette belt, which featured diamond-studded silver, and he awarded it to Kilrain. In turn, Sullivan's financial backers gave John L. his own championship belt, made with 14-karat gold. The belt included a 3-karat diamond that was encrusted with 256 diamonds. It was valued at $8,000. This is like in the 1890s, valued at $8,000. When presented with the belt, Sullivan roared, "The belt that Fox created, I wouldn't put that belt around the neck of a goddamn dog." Sullivan said he wouldn't put the belt Fox made around the neck of a dog. And there's Sullivan. Okay, here's John L. John L. was the last bare knuckles champion and the first glove champion. Okay, last bare knuckles champion, first glove champion, John L. Sullivan. Okay, so the Sullivan-Kilrain fight seemed predestined, but it had yet to be finalized in 1887 when Sullivan set off on a European tour. The popular champion sparred in 50 exhibitions across England, Scotland, and Ireland against inferior opponents. He had one legitimate fight, a bare-knuckle encounter with Englishman Charlie Mitchell. The fight, fought in a pouring rain, was declared a draw after 39 rounds. Okay? Declared a draw after 39 rounds. Wow. Okay. So, Kilrain, meanwhile, also went to Europe. He accepted a challenge from Jim Smith, who shared the British heavyweight title with Mitchell. So yeah, Sullivan went over there and fought this guy Mitchell, who was the British heavyweight champion. So Kilrain followed him to Europe and fought the guy who shared the championship with the guy Sullivan fought. Okay. So Sullivan's handlers hoped for a Smith victory, which would rid them of the Foxfield nuisance Kilrain. Because Sullivan was hoping Kilrain would lose, then they would be rid of him without having to fight him. The Kilrain met Smith on December 19th, 1887, on an island on the Seine River in Paris. The two slugged it out for 106 rounds before the fight was declared a draw due to darkness. Now, the younger and less experienced Kilrain had proved his mettle. Sullivan could duck Kilrain no more. However, on his European tour, Sullivan had ballooned up to 280 pounds. His notorious drinking, he was said to consume entire magnums of champagne and beer steins filled with bourbon, right? And it had caught up to him. He ballooned up to 280 pounds. He returned to the United States in April 1888 and soon thereafter suffered a health scare so bad that a priest was summoned to his bedside. In his autobiography, Sullivan said he suffered from typhoid fever, gastric fever, inflammation of the bowels, heart trouble, and liver complaints. In truth, Sullivan was suffering from kidney and liver collapse due to his heavy drinking. Sullivan came up with all these fancy ailments, but it all boiled down to liver ailments from his drinking, kidney and liver collapse from his heavy drinking, okay? His weight plummeted from 280 to a sickly 160 pounds, but he recovered over the next 6 months. In early 1889, Sullivan finally accepted Fox Challenge to fight Kilrain. Okay? The stakes for the Sullivan-Kilrain fight would exceed $20,000. Remember, this is in the 1880s, okay? The stakes would exceed $20,000, with the fighters' backers putting up $10,000 each. So that's $30,000. In addition, Sullivan-Kilrain would add $1,000 each to the pot. So that's $32,000 now. At the start of the fight, Sullivan bet an additional $5,000. That's $37,000, almost $40,000 in the 1880s. And the winner would get the other championship belt and a percentage of the gate, which would wind up netting another $10,000. Now we're almost up to like $50,000 this fight is worth in the 1880s, okay? And an estimated $500,000 would be wagered by fans, with the smart money being laid on Kilrain due to Sullivan's well-known health issues. Then Sullivan stepped into the ring and peeled off his robe, showing off a sweat 215-pound frame in excellent shape. William Muldoon, a noted fitness expert, had worked with Sullivan over the previous 6 months in Belfast, New York. Muldoon had kept Sullivan from drinking by putting him through a rigorous routine of wood chopping, plowing fields, jumping rope, and sparring. Now, upon seeing Sullivan in such great condition, the crowd immediately sensed that the money bet on Kilrain was now in jeopardy. Now, Kilrain weighed in at 195 pounds, which may or may not have been an exaggeration of 10 pounds or more. Then the two would fight under the London prize ring rules, which combined boxing with wrestling. Now, the Queensberry rules were around, but you still had the option of, picking which set of rules you want to fight under. And they decided to fight under the London prize ring rules, which meant bare knuckles, okay? And was combined with wrestling. You could throw your other man down and all that kind of stuff. Now, the major difference between Marquis of Queensberry rules and the London prize ring rules was that the Queensberry rules called for gloves, while the London prize ring rules did not. But in addition, the London prize ring rules permitted grabbing and throwing your opponent down. And the round did not have a time limit, but instead came to an end when a fighter was thrown to the ground or knocked down with a punch. And there was no specific number of rounds, okay? As a result of the rule permitting grabbing, Sullivan had cut his hair and shaved off his signature mustache to give Jake less to grab onto, right? At 10:13 a.m., the referee, John Fitzpatrick, who would many years later become the mayor of New Orleans, called the fighters to scratch. A line scratched out in the middle of the ring, and you had to come touch this line to begin every round. If you didn't come out and touch that line, when the referee hollered scratch, you had like 10 seconds or something, you would lose. So the referee hollered scratch, 10:13 a.m. to begin the fight. Okay? Fitzpatrick then shouted time, and the last bare knuckle world heavyweight championship fight began. In the first round, Kilrain grabbed Sullivan around the neck and threw him down. The round lasted just 15 seconds, because remember, a throwdown or a knockdown, the round was over. So Kilrain immediately came out and grabbed Sullivan and threw him down. So the round lasted just 15 seconds. And the action was more of a wrestling match for the next few rounds. The fourth round lasted 15 minutes. In either the fifth or sixth round, reports from the time vary. Kilrain hit Sullivan in the air, drawing blood. The referee Fitzpatrick called out, "First blood, Kilrain," and money exchanged hands in the stand. Bets were settled. They bet on everything. They bet on who would bleed first and all kinds of stuff. So the referee hollered first blood, Kilrain. Money changed hands in the stands. Sullivan began to outbox Kilrain, though, landing heavy blows. At the end of the 17th round, Kilrain's seconds had to carry him to his corner. 17th round in this type of fight, that's early. Okay? That's early in the fight. And already they had to carry Jake back to his corner. Just the 17th round. So the fighters wore high-top shoes with cleats to help them get traction in the dirt because they were outside and the ring didn't have canvas. The ring was flat on the ground. They were fighting in dirt. So they wore cleats on the bottom of the shoes to get traction. Kilrain stepped on Sullivan's foot, accidentally or otherwise, and at some point, blood could be seen seeping through the tops of one of Sullivan's shoes, right? Two had gone at each other for over an hour as they reached the 30th round, right? Their backs were now burned and blistered from the sun. The handlers treated them between rounds with water and tea. Okay? Yeah, there's a look at the spectators and everybody looking at the affair. At some point, Sullivan's corner began mixing whiskey into the champion's tea to fortify him. Because remember, Sullivan was an alcoholic. And they had that whiskey over there just in case it go a long time, right? So Sullivan must have told his seconds it's time to start mixing that whiskey in there. So now they're mixing whiskey and tea in Sullivan's corner to fortify him. In the 44th round, Sullivan vomited, probably from drinking the whiskey in the broiling hot sun. Now, Kilrain asked Sullivan if he wanted to declare the fight a draw, which only served to anger Sullivan. Sullivan said, no, let's keep going. So Sullivan dominated the later rounds, although Kilrain's punches did cause one of Sullivan's eyes to close. However, Sullivan's attack wore Kilrain down. At the start of the 30th round, Kilrain's handlers had to lift him off his stool and point him toward the scratch mark, right? The rounds counted into the 70s. Kilrain was near exhaustion. A doctor at ringside told Kilrain's corner that their man could die if he continued to fight. Mike Donovan, one of Kilrain's cornermen, had seen two men die in bare knuckles fights. Okay? As Kilrain attempted to stagger back to the scratch for the start of the 76th round, Donovan threw a sponge into the ring. Donovan had already seen two men die in bare knuckles fights, and the doctor had told his corner that if he continued, if he went back out there, he could die. So Donovan threw the towel in, or he threw a sponge in, right, in the fight. Although Kilrain protested, the fight ended after 2 hours, 16 minutes, and 25 seconds, and 75 rounds. The fight was over, and so was boxing's bare knuckle era. The fans and fighters eventually headed back to their trains. The law was still on the lookout for Sullivan, Kilrain, and their financial backers. Sullivan was arrested in Nashville, Tennessee, as he traveled back to New York. Kilrain was arrested in Baltimore, Maryland. After a long trial, Sullivan was found guilty of illegal fighting and sentenced to a year in jail. He appealed, and the verdict was overturned, and he only paid a $500 fine. Kilrain received 2 months in jail, which he served on Charles Rich's farm, where the fight had taken place, and Charles Rich was one of the backers of the fight. So that was just a token punishment. Kilrain served his 2 months on the farm of one of the backers of the fight, where the fight took place, so he didn't really do any time or anything. He just stayed down there and vacationed for a couple months. Now, Sullivan didn't fight again for another 3 years. He never fought bare knuckles again. Sullivan did come the glove champ. That was the last bare knuckles fight which Sullivan won, last bare knuckle champion, and he became the first glove champion. Now, Kilrain had 15 more professional fights after that, but he never fought for the world title again. Never fought for the title in the glove era, Kilrain, but he did fight in the glove era. Now, Sullivan died on February 2nd, 1918 in Abingdon, Massachusetts at the age of 59. Jake Kilrain was a pallbearer at Sullivan's funeral. Kilrain died 19 years later at the age of 78 in Quincy, Massachusetts. He is buried there in St. Mary's Cemetery, just a few miles from his old foe, John L. Sullivan. Okay? So now we got a 49-round fight. We talked a little about this one yesterday. This is for these pioneers we talked about yesterday in this fight. Okay, this is Joe Jeanette and Sam McVeigh in this one. There they are. There's Jeanette on the left, McVeigh on the right. Let's talk about that one. Joe Jeanette and Sam McVeigh. This was 49 rounds, a barn burner. This one was. Yeah. But one of boxing's greatest wars. They called this fight Pandemonium in Paris. Pandemonium in Paris. These were two of the pioneers, black pioneers we talked about yesterday. Okay, let's get into it. Sam McVeigh and Joe Jeanette were two of the best heavyweights in the world in 1909. But because they were black men, neither one would get a shot at the championship of the world. Okay? The reigning champion, Jack Johnson, was the first black American to win the title. And he knew that racist America would pay nothing to watch him defend it against another black man, whereas he could cash in by taking on a string of overmatched white hosts. It didn't help the case of either Jeanette or McVeigh that they were talented, dangerous fighters. Johnson was looking for easier pickings. The 24-year-old Sam McVeigh, 24-year-old Sam McVeigh was born in Texas, but raised in California, and spent his early years as a farm laborer before turning to prize fighting in 1902. He had tussled with Johnson 3 times, all losses, but he had been a novice in those fights with Jack and had improved a great deal in the years since. An aggressive brawler, McVeigh stood 5'10.5" tall. Now, what he lacked in boxing technique, he made up for with a will to win and inordinate physical strength. Because of his aggressive style, very dark skin, and African features, the racist American press routinely described Sam in bestial terms. He had made Paris his home over the preceding 2 years, right? He had made Paris his home. He had made Paris his home over the preceding 2 years, finding France less discriminatory than the United States, having gone undefeated in 18 fights since arriving in France, right? And since his arrival, he had gone undefeated and had become sensationally popular. Yeah, it is Sam right there, as a matter of fact. Sam McVeigh. It is Sam. Now, a blacksmith's son, New Jersey's Joe Jeanette, had been fighting professionally for less than 5 years. He too had already met Johnson in the ring early on, 7 times. He went 1 win, 1 loss, 1 draw against the future champion, with the rest of their meetings ending in no decision results. because, in some states, boxing decisions were illegal at the time. Now, half inch shorter than McVeigh, Jeanette was a clever, versatile fighter, equally at home, boxing on the outside or shortening his punches on the inside. His light skin, more traditionally handsome features, and impressive build, has some describing him as a black Adonis. And Jeanette's best weapon was thought to be his left hook. Intrigued by McVeigh's success abroad, Jeanette arrived in Paris around the beginning of 1909. To that point, he had not lost since last facing Johnson in November 1906. It is Jeanette right there. Joe Jeanette, okay? He had not lost since his last fight with Jack Johnson, 1906. Now, the French capital, Paris, was not big enough for two stellar heavyweight stars, and a clash was inevitable. One newspaper recorded that challenges had been hurled back, right and left, back and forth by both men, while they raked down the money in the music halls. And since Jeanette, McVeigh, and their black contemporary Sam Langford remained locked out of the World Championship picture, the official World Championship picture, by virtue of their skin color, they were left to fight each other dozens of times over the coming years, often for the so-called color heavyweight championship of the world. On February 20th, 1909, that recognition was on the line when McVeigh beat Jeanette over 20 rounds in Paris, scoring 3 knockdowns in the process. The action was so tame that many derided the fight as a sham orchestrated by the two fighters and their camps. Okay? The defeat was Jeanette's first in 2.5 years and 18 fights. But some were already talking of relegating him to the discard pile. So yeah, I mean, like they do now, one loss. They were doing it way back then. Joe Jeanette had won 18 fights straight. He took this one loss to McVeigh. Some were relegating him to the discard pile, like they do now. Okay? But that didn't just start. 18-1 in his last 19 fights, but some people were ready to call him trash. Okay? So let's continue. Now, a rematch was arranged and held in the same location on April 17th. Okay? Yeah, the rematch was in the same location as the first fight. This was the 49 one, the rematch. 49 round one, the rematch. Now, scheduled as a fight to the finish, the rounds were unlimited, and the fight would not end until someone was knocked out or disqualified. It would be a titanic clash that would establish both men as ring immortals, championship or not. Now, sources differ as to who was the betting favorite. Okay. Now, promoters must have been disappointed by the comparatively dismal turnout of roughly 2,500 persons, about half the venue's capacity. Now, the rumors of a fix surrounding their prior encounter had kept many people away for the second fight. As the fight got underway, McVeigh's aggression gave him the upper hand. Perhaps too cautious to start, Jeanette kept at a distance that backfired. He was missing more than his opponent. In round 5, a combination of a left hook followed by a right cross dropped Jeanette. After barely surviving the rest of the round, Jeanette gradually found his range and worked his way into the fight. By round 9, he was landing hard combinations that rocked McVeigh. Sam's nose bled profusely and his left eye was swelling. The momentum had changed once again by round 12, when McVeigh found a second win and resumed his aggression. He had Jeanette in trouble with several hard blows, but an excess of the resin used on the ring floor caused the London McVeigh to repeatedly slip to the floor in Jeanette's corner, allowing Jeanette time to escape the round on his feet. So that was probably done on purpose. It was an excess of resin on the floor in Jeanette's corner, which Jeanette probably knew about and knew to be careful in his footing over there in that area, but McVeigh didn't, and McVeigh repeatedly slipped to the floor. So of course that was done on purpose, you know. Jeanette knew to watch his footing over there, but Sam didn't, and Sam kept falling. Now once Jeanette tumbled to the floor as well. Now for several rounds following, McVeigh dominated while Jeanette's blows struggled to find their target. Both fighters appeared to be either tired or saving their energy for the later rounds. Now, what is the later rounds when you got in an unlimited fight? Right? What do you call the later rounds? You don't know what the later round is. You could be in round 20, but like that fight, they went 110 rounds. So what is the later round, right? But they were saving themselves for something, either tired or saving themselves for something. Saving themselves for whatever the later rounds turned out to be. Anyway, Jeanette turned aggressive at the start of round 19, but McVeigh dodged the incoming fire and retaliated with an explosive left hook that put Joe down for a second time. Pleased by the surprise after several slow rounds, the crowd roared its approval. After Jeanette rose, McVeigh clobbered him down twice more before the round was over. Jeanette's cornermen splashed water on his face to awaken him while he lay on the canvas, a tactic that Sam shouted down as unfair. Well, as long as the round is over, you know, they can do what they want to do, you know. Now, they can put water on him. Between subsequent rounds, Jeanette's handlers administered oxygen to their fighter from a tank on hand, believing it would help energize him. A new technique at the time, only recently introduced during a boxing match in England, had been a subject of controversy of late, but had yet to be banned. Incidentally, modern physicians insist that administering oxygen in a boxing match, or NFL sidelines for that matter, has no positive effect on athletic performance outside of a placebo effect. Okay? Yeah, experts say oxygen doesn't have no kind of effect on athletic performance outside of a placebo effect. Now, McVeigh's corner also used oxygen during the fight, but they mixed it with nitrogen and sprayed the mix on a cut around Sam's eye, believing it would freeze his bleeding. It was likely a painful procedure for their fighter to endure, and pick your poison. It probably worsened the swelling, even as it stopped the bleeding, okay? So putting that nitrogen on there probably worsened the swelling, but it stopped the bleeding. So pick your poison. I guess you rather had a swelling because the referee and the doctor see that bleeding, that they're stopping quicker than the swelling, I guess. So wow. But it worsened the swelling, but it stopped the bleeding. Now, as the rounds dragged on, the fight was not so much an action-packed slugfest as a brutal, slogging war of attrition, reminiscent of the old-style bare knuckles boxes of the 18th and early 19th centuries. A New York Times article praised it as the greatest fight witnessed in France since bare knuckle legends John O'Sullivan and Charlie Mitchell fought their 30-round draw at Chantilly in 1888. That's when we just talked about that, remember? When the Sullivan Kilrain matchup. Oh my goodness, I don't know why the chat keeps going off. Here we go. Okay, now, bear with me for a minute, please. Pandemonium in Paris. Yeah, they about in the 30th round, something like that. Let me get back to where we were. But how's everybody today? It's Thursday. Yeah, tomorrow we're gonna have for like 4 different big fighters on the profile. And the first one gonna be Gunboat Smith himself. Don't miss tomorrow. Be here early. Gunboat Smith is gonna be part of the profile tomorrow. Okay? You don't want to miss that. Yeah, there we go. Now, in round 26, a right hand pummeled Jeanette to the floor for the 5th time. Only the bell saved him from a knockout defeat. But the fighters were clearly slowing, clinching, and wrestling more than punching. 2 rounds later, Jeanette was down again and survived McVeigh's subsequent desperate assault. As exhaustion set in, the fighters began slipping again, and the effort of rising only tired them out even more. As the fight approached round 40, a half-blind, badly winded, and blood-spattered McVeigh looked ready to go. He was stumbling around the ring in pursuit of his opponent, and his punches were pathetically sloppy. Having suffered 6 knockdowns and multiple other falls, Jeanette seemed to have too little left in his tank to take advantage of Sam's vulnerable state. The 40th round went by. The 45th went by too. By round 48, McVeigh had nothing left. Jeanette landed multiple uppercuts on the inside, but they lacked the energy to take out the iron-jawed McVeigh. But once the bell started round 49, McVeigh crossed the ring and offered a handshake to his rival, conceding defeat. A ringside reporter wrote that the battered McVeigh no longer has a human face. After roughly 3.5 hours of hard effort and punishment, he could take no more. Sam McVeigh, crowned by Parisians as the king of boxing, falls from his pedestal. Or Sam, with a French reporter at ringside. Jeanette's elated cornermen carried him around the ring as the crowd applauded his grueling come-from-behind victory. He had endured at least 7 knockdowns, possibly more, and 48 rounds of hell to emerge victorious. Now, decades later, Ring Magazine founder Ned Fleischer would claim that Jeanette and McVeigh rose from a total of 38 knockdowns between them, but he never named his source for this claim. Subsequent writers adopted the print the legend approach to this and have perpetuated what is almost certainly a myth. The hours-long trial needed no exaggeration to endure as a clash and testament to the greatness of its 2 participants. In Fleischer's own magazine, The Ring, Jeanette's cornerman called the fight the most grueling fight I've ever seen. Years later, he said, it lasted 49 rounds, and what a brawl. He continued, there were so many knockdowns, I lost count. Sadly, neither man would get their more than deserved shot at the official heavyweight championship. In all, the duo would face each other on 5 more occasions. McVeigh winning 1, Jeanette winning 1, 2 ending in a draw, and 1 ending in no decision. Championship or not, both men were deservedly inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in the inaugural year of 1990. Okay, Sam McVeigh, Joe Jeanette, and the big 49-rounder, Mike Masick. And what's up, Mike Masick in the building? Okay, we got one more. We got a 42-rounder. Okay? Yeah, we were talking about some fights. Battling past 40 rounds. Some fights in the before the round limits. Okay? Now we got a 42-rounder we're going to talk about now. Okay? Let's see. Where's the 42-rounder at? That was Pandemonium in Paris. And yeah, here we go. Let's get that up here. Yeah, this was the one we also talked briefly about this yesterday. E.O. Master was involved in this one. Him and Battling Nelson, the cheating guy. Yeah. the old master Joe Gans and Battling Nelson in their classic 42-round fight. We're going to talk about that now. Okay. There they are right there. There's Battling Nelson on the left, the old master on the right. I think we're going to talk about it. Come on now. There we go. So don't do this. Get all the way up to showtime and then start messing up. But salute Mike Mazzy. Okay, let's get into this. Our final one. We had 4 fights today of the era when rounds were unlimited. Battling past 40 rounds. This is the 42-round one. Okay, so Labor Day, September 3rd, 1906. The famous battle between Joe Gans and Battling Nelson for the lightweight championship of the world in Goldfield, Nevada. Now, the fight was an original one among the last of the great finish fights. It was, in fact, the longest championship fight ever contested with boxing gloves. Okay? Wow. Longest fight ever contested with boxing gloves. So, Joe Gans, hailed as the old master by his contemporaries, was the epitome of the classic boxer puncher. Gans possessed both remarkable speed and punching power. His jab was straight and accurate. His right hand deadly from 6 inches out. His left hook a life taker. He had grace, balance, and impeccable defense, being perhaps the greatest fighter ever at blocking punches and countering. His opponent often thought he was a mind reader, sensing what they were going to do next. Okay? Battling Nelson, the durable Dane, was a rough and tumble pressure fighter who was aggressive and unyielding in the relentless, dogged pursuit of his opponents. One writer said of him that Nelson carries in his head the thickest skull bones of any human being since Neanderthal man. Like a torrential rain, Battling Nelson was a force of nature that just wouldn't stop coming, no matter what one threw at him. Wow, they had the thickest skull since Neanderthal man. That's thick. Now, this classic confrontation between the master boxer and the rugged, savage swarmer took place in Goldfield, Nevada, which was a popular Western mining camp town. The fight was promoted by Tex Rickard in his first great effort. This was the first big fight that Tex Rickard promoted. The purse was $33,500, of which Gans was to receive $11,000 and Nelson $22,500. And Gans was actually the champion, but Nelson got twice what he got, you know. So yeah, but that was the racism of the area. But anyway, the gate receipt was $76,000, the largest ever realized for a prize fight up to that point at that time. The official attendance was 6,200, and the odds at the ringside were 2-1 for the old master. The referee was George Soller. Now, according to the agreed upon contract, Gans weighed in 3 times. The last time before the start of the fight at 3 o'clock. Okay? Now, Gans' weight was a big issue prior to the fight. Gans had not defended the lightweight title in 2 years, and it was believed he would have trouble making 133 pounds, then the lightweight limit, okay? Now, Nelson's manager, Billy Nolan, tried to gain Nelson an advantage over Gans by trying to force the great champion to weigh in dressed in his full fighting gear. The San Francisco Chronicle reported, Nelson's manager insisted Gans make 133 pounds in his fighting togs, which really means 129 stripped, okay? So this newspaper saying all his fighting gear adds 4 more pounds to him. If he weigh in 133, he's well under it with all that stuff on. Now, Jimmy Howard, an ex-trainer of both Gans and Nelson, said that Nelson's tactics are very unfair, but Joe had to accede to everything to get Nelson to fight, right? To get him in the ring. He had to accept all that nonsense. Okay. The chat keeps disappearing. Okay, there we go. Yeah, Joe had to go through all of that just to get him in the ring. Now, although Gans was recognized as champion by the fans in virtually every newspaper of the period, Nelson's manager threatened to pull Nelson out of the fight if Gans would not cede to his extra demands. The general consensus of newspapermen and sportsmen alike was that the black man had been forced to take the worst of all of the arrangements. Now, if you watch the film of the fight, the first thing you notice was the fighters head for the ring is that Gans is carrying an umbrella to keep off the scorching Nevada heat, Nevada's sun. Now, between rounds, the cornermen are fiercely fanning the fighters. It was very hot that day. Although Gans appeared to be strong, the dehydration and weight training combined with the searing heat had to take a toll on Gans's body. It was believed by some historians that Gans' fight with tuberculosis, which would shortly take his life, began due to the circumstances of this fight. Now, before the fight, the two fighters posed for a series of photographs. One of the most famous photos shown in many boxing magazines is actually inverted. That picture shows them as southpaws, and the film proves they are both posing as orthodox. At the beginning of the fight, Gans took an early lead. Just as Muhammad Ali did in his fights with Joe Frazier, Gans dominated the opening round. By the end of the first round, Nelson is bleeding from both ears. Joe Gans threw a 5-punch flurry in round 2, crushing the myth that fighters of this era did not throw combinations. Gans, in fact, often threw combinations at Nelson with frightening accuracy. They are most often landed when Gans is catching Nelson coming in. Gans is primarily a counterpuncher, but he has a fantastic jab and often leads with it to create openings. Now, Gans swept the early rounds, outboxing and outfoxing his pugnacious opponent. Gans scored a flash knockdown of the Iron-Chin Nelson in the 7th round. It was a stinging right to the cheek, followed by a powerful left hook that momentarily dropped Nelson on his knees. The Chronicle reported, Nelson's face looked more like scrambled beefsteak than a human countenance by this time, by the 7th round. Remember? And this is early. This is unlimited rounds. Now, the most impressive aspect of Gans in this fight is his footwork. Not a lot of jumping around, but in spite of Nelson's strong aggression and constant pressure inside, he never is able to trap Gans against the ropes. Gans turns, slips, and never gets caught against the ropes. He is very evasive with deft moves. Whenever Nelson tries to bull Gans to the ropes, Joe lowers his center of gravity, holds his ground, then turns and keeps the fight in ring center at all times. And nobody was doing stuff like that back then, turning fighters and that kind of stuff like Gans was doing that night. Nobody was doing that back then, not unless it was George Dixon. But not many fighters. Most fighters would come out when they holler scratch and total scratch, and that's where they would be for the majority of the round. But Joe Gans was using fancy footwork, turning fighters, all kinds of stuff like that. Yep. And on the rare instance his back touched the ropes, Joe was only there for a split second before he slipped away. That was very impressive. Nelson absolutely could not get Gans back to the ropes. Gans also demonstrated that he could move in and out and was very evasive with his upper body. He also showed that he could even dance a little bit, circling and dancing out of danger when necessary, although not too much of this in a scheduled 45-round fight. Yeah, you're only in the 7th round, Joe. Can't be dancing too much. It was scheduled for 40. Actually, it did have a limit. This was scheduled for 45 rounds. Okay. Now, Nelson is clearly the aggressor, putting on constant pressure and going to the body while throwing a lot of punches. There's a consistent work rate by both fighters. Most of the action takes place up close. Gans' inside work is comparable to Pernell Whitaker against Julio Cesar Chavez. There's excellent blocking, slipping, sidestepping, evasion, and counterpunching. And don't forget the turning. All of this by Gans. Simply outstanding defense. Nelson comes on beginning in the 9th round with a strong body attack. He has excellent body punching, left hooks to the body, and a Mike Tyson-like right to the side that was described as a peach of a shot. Okay? A peach of a shot. We got Arnie Boxing in the building now. Yeah, Arnie. We are talking about, we had 4 fights today from when rounds were unlimited. All of them went past 40. Actually, this one was scheduled for 45 rounds. They had started scheduling limits to rounds, but they were still up in the 30s and 40s. This one was scheduled for 45. We salute Arnie Boxing. Okay, so yeah, Joe was putting on a clinic kind of then, but Nelson was starting to come on all of a sudden. He threw a Mike Tyson-like shot to Joe's side, okay? Okay. Now, where was I? Yeah. Now, Nelson's tough as nails, and he keeps coming no matter what, with a George Chuvalo-like chin against Muhammad Ali. Now, Nelson seemed impervious to punishment and came in all the time, often leading with his head, which caused referee Sala to constantly warn Nelson for fouls. The Chicago Record Herald, September 4th, 1906, the next day, reported that Nelson's manager was actually calling for his fighter to lead with his head, right? Butt him, don't let him get away, his manager cried from the corner. Today, this would quickly get you disqualified. Now, Gans seemed equally comfortable, outside or inside, though he lands his hardest blows from the outside. Gans' straight right hand is thrown short, compact, and explosive, much like that of Joe Louis. Now, Nelson tries to crowd Gans. He just can't seem to get him against the ropes, though. Gradually, Nelson is able to go to work on the inside. He won his first round in the 10th round, cutting Gans' mouth and pounding away to the body. The next 4 rounds were fairly close as the tide began to turn slightly in Nelson's favor as he kept up the pressure. Then in the 15th round, Gans explodes, flooring Nelson suddenly with a sizzling right hand. Nelson was shaky as he rose on unsteady legs and covered up at close quarters to avoid any of Gans' long-range straight shots. Nelson, callous and undeterred, rallied to take rounds 16 through 19. Gans roared back to take the 20th round, nearly stopping Nelson with a ferocious flurry of punches, punctuated by a final horrific right cross to the head that had Nelson pitching forward, out on his feet at the bell. The bell saved Nelson from a certain knockout after round 20. And if this had occurred today, the fight surely would have been stopped. Gans seemed to be in total control now and won the next couple of rounds. Nelson rallied in the 23rd round with a series of body shots and a hard right to the head that shook Gans. By the 25th round, both men began to tire and the pace slowed. Then, in the 28th round, Nelson tried to open things up and force Gans to the ropes once again. Gans, like a rejuvenated man, drove Nelson back with several fearful power shots to the jaw, the first of which had Nelson careening around the ring like a drunken sailor. Gans kept after him, and Nelson was on the verge of being knocked out again at the bell. In the 30th round, Nelson intentionally hit Gans after the bell, which caused the crowd to rise at once and to roar in protest. In the 33rd round, Gans broke his right arm with a terrific blow, and his arm landed on the top of Nelson's hard head. It may have seemed like the break Nelson was waiting for, but Gans continued to box brilliantly, beating Nelson with his great left jab. Okay, right arm broken. Fighting one-handed. This was the 34th round. Nelson whistled in the heat, unable to penetrate the defense of the old master. Nelson absorbed a frightful beating. He was bleeding from both ears, mouth, and nose as well as from cuts on his face. With his left eye already closed, Nelson had enough. He had had enough. Nelson, who had been warned throughout by referee Solid for low blows, fouled out in the 42nd round. The foul punch is very obvious on the film. The blow was clearly observed by everyone in the arena, and there was not a murmur of dissent from the spectators in the post-fight, right? Now, Gans said he would have put Nelson out in a few more rounds had he not been fouled. I was playing for his right eye, Gans declared. He told the Chicago Record a couple of days later. Once I closed that, with his other eye already closed, he would have been my chicken. The two gladiators had fought 2 hours, 50 minutes, and 42 rounds. The longest championship battle ever fought with gloves under Marquis of Queensberry rules. The durable Dane, Nelson, couldn't take any more punishment. The AP reported that it was a deliberate foul to prevent getting knocked out, and wrote Nelson strikes Gans and groin when defeat seemed certain. Here are some comments from ringside eyewitnesses. It looks as though Nelson, who was a very badly beaten man, took an easy way to quit. That was from Frankie Neal, the former bantamweight champion. If ever a fair decision was rendered, referee George Solid gave one when they awarded the fight to Gans. Jim Coffroth, fight promoter. Battling Nelson took an awful beating in one of the greatest fights I've ever seen. A fighter that was active during the time. Kid Joe Egan, who was ringside. I watched the fight carefully, and Gans had the best of it all the way. I think Nelson is the gamest and toughest man to ever step in the ring. There's not one man in 1,000 who could have stood the punishment that the Dane took tonight. Jack Welch, boxing referee. Never in the history of boxing have lightweights put up such a performance as at Goldfield. Ben Benjamin, sports writer, San Francisco Chronicle. And today, a large monument is visible in Goldfield from U.S. Highway 45, commemorating one of the great fights of all time. Yeah, that monument is still right there today in Goldfield, Nevada. Now, yeah, these fighters fighting all these rounds. What makes these men so tough like that? Let's talk about that. Why are these, 110 rounds, 75, 64, 42, 45. I sound like I'm a quarterback. But yeah, I'm talking about the kind of rounds these guys was fighting. What is it? What makes them tough like that? Let's talk about that. Okay, let's talk about that. Okay, the question is, what factors contributed to professional boxers being tougher in the past? Glad y'all asked. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Glad y'all asked. Okay. Now, what factors contributed to professional boxers being tougher in the past? More poverty, harder lives, less opportunity, especially if you were black. Far more fights if you were a boxer. All contributed to fighters being a lot tougher. Yeah, that's Joe Gans and Nelson right there. There's two tough guys. Homicide Henry Armstrong and Lou Ambrose. I forgot Lou's nickname. The Herkimer Hurricane, yeah. Homicide Henry Armstrong and the Herkimer Hurricane, Lou Ambrose. Talk about some tough guys. The poverty of a scale we cannot conceive of today, and living in places so dire that it defies belief today, drove most fighters into the ring. Old era fighters were driven by forces the modern giants could never understand. Not only were fighters from the past generally dirt poor, they lived in places where you fought or you went under. For instance, Rocky Marciano grew up on the south side of Brockton, Massachusetts, where you had to fight, his brother said. That's just the way it was. Benny Leonard, Hall of Fame lightweight, was born and raised in the Jewish ghetto, Lower East Side of Manhattan, New York City. Benny Leonard said, I learned to fight because I had to protect myself and my family. I did it for money because it was my way out, other than becoming a gangster. When John Henry Lewis was born, to say opportunities for a decent life were limited would be an understatement. Lewis said, why did I start boxing? For a poor kid born in Los Angeles, there weren't no other ways up or out than boxing or baseball. I couldn't throw a baseball, but I could sure hit. So I boxed. Boxing it was. For black kids like Henry Armstrong, weren't alone. Okay? Poor white kids like Jack Dempsey, who left home at age 16 to live as a hobo because his family couldn't feed him, faced starvation and homelessness before he discovered fighting. Yeah, I told you Jack Dempsey used to be so hungry, he would walk into a bar and just challenge anybody in there to fight for money just to eat. And he said he got knocked down and he was hurting so bad he wanted to stay down, but he said he couldn't. He had to get up and win so he could eat. He hadn't eaten in like 2 or 3 days. So he couldn't stay there. He said, I had to get up and win that fight so I could get something to eat. Now, Grantland Rice, that's what made these boxers back in the day so tough like that. Go 75, 110 rounds, right? Now, Grantland Rice, the legendary sports writer, quoted Jack Dempsey as saying, this is what I was talking about. When I was a young fellow, he started fighting at 15 against bigger and older opponents. He said, when I was a young fellow, I was knocked down plenty of times, and I was hurting and wanted to stay down, but I couldn't stay down. I had to get up to win the fight and get their $2 or go hungry. I had to get up. I was one of those hungry fighters. You could have hit me on the chin with a sledgehammer for $5. When you hit me eating for 2 days, you will understand what I'm talking about. Nowhere the slums in the United States, nowhere the slums just in the United States. Roberto Duran grew up raised in the slums in the El Carrillo neighborhood in Panama City, Panama. He had to fight to survive, and he never totally left the streets he was raised in. Alexis Arguello once asked Roberto Duran what he enjoyed about boxing. Arguello said, "I enjoy the competition, testing my skills against other top opponents." Duran said, "Not me. I just like hurting people." Okay. Roberto said, "I ain't worrying about testing up against no top competition. I just like hurting people." Okay. King Carlos Monzon was born in the city of San Javier, Argentina, into a dirt-poor family of Muscovy Indian descent, and was raised in poverty with his 12 brothers and sisters. Monzon was only able to go to school through the 2nd grade. In the 3rd grade, he quit to try to help earn enough so his family did not go hungry. King Carlos worked at various jobs that a 9-year-old child could, such as shoe shiner, paperboy, and milkman. As a kid, he showed an interest in boxing. Later, when asked why he chose boxing, King Carlos said, "I wanted enough to eat and enough left over to feed my family." Now, black athletes used to have only boxing as a major sport, okay? Now, for fanboys who brag about the poor folks had other ways to make a good living, Henry Armstrong answered that best when asked why he boxed. Because a poor black kid with no education had no way to make a living. Instead of working for scraps, I box and eat the finest steaks. And boxing was the first sport to integrate. Boxing allowed black fighters to fight for titles at least 35 years before every other major sport allowed blacks to even play on major league teams. Joe Gans became the first black American boxing champion in 1902. George Dixon became the first black champion in the 1890s. Jack Johnson became won the heavyweight title in 1908. Baseball did not integrate until 1945, over 40 years later. Football until 1946, over 40 years later. Basketball until 1950, almost 50 years later. Hockey until 1958, an incredible almost 60 years later. Boxing was integrated, first sport to integrate. And even then, there were official roster limits for black players. Now, the best black athletes were not fully welcome in other sports until relatively recently, so they boxed, but no longer. Finally, fighters today do not fight as often or as good competition as past era fighters, okay? Not as often or as good competition. It isn't hard to figure out that the more you fight against the best, it either toughens you up or breaks you. Back in the old days, the sea level was weeded out, okay? When you went there against the best, it either toughened you up or it broke you, okay? Where nowadays, sea level fighters got belts. At any given point nowadays, there's over 200 champions in the sport, okay? Over 200 at any given time. But back in the old days, the sea level fighters were weeded out, okay? You were like, for when somebody didn't feel like, somebody wanted to get a tune-up and didn't want to get it in sparring, wanted to get it on the lights in the actual fight. That's what sea level fighters were for then. They weren't to fight in championship fights and stuff. No, not like now. I've seen a fight like a couple months ago, a guy was like a 6-fight prospect, had a belt over his shoulder. Like, what? He had the green Intercontinental North Nowhere belt or something. Like, what? Yeah. 6 fights, got a belt over his shoulder. Come on, man. That ain't boxing. But anyway, yeah, that's why fighters was so tougher back then, though. The sport is just so watered down now. It's so watered down. Now, the past greats toughened up. Most modern managers come right out and admit they avoid danger. As boxing writer and historian Anthony Mason notes, great fighters will lose if they fight other great fighters. They don't do that now. Lou Catalano of The Guardian asks the most basic question for boxing today. Why would two talented boxers fight each other when one of them could lose? Why be a hero when you might lose that zero? Okay? Write that down. Why be a hero when you might lose that zero? You heard it here on Cat Sports. Why be a hero when you might lose that zero? That's the motto of today's fighters. But in past eras, they got better and tougher by fighting more often and better opponents. Sugar Ray Robinson put it bluntly. You don't improve by fighting candy cane girls. See, he's a boxer, he can call him that. That's not me, that's Sugar Ray Robinson. Fighters today fight far fewer fights, thus boxing infinitely fewer rounds, box less in the gym, and simply do not learn the fundamentals of the game because practice makes perfect. And nowadays, you get greater money for a single fight, and that means fighters do not fight as much, and thus do not learn as much. Okay? Getting all this money for each fight means you don't have to fight as much, and you don't learn as much. Not rocket science. There are also far fewer boxing events held. In addition, there are fewer fight clubs, licensed fighters, and licensed trainers today than in 1970. And in the United States, fewer than even in 1930. Okay? And fighters do not fight and thus do not learn and are nowhere near as tough or accomplished than the titans of the past. Today, it is difficult for people to imagine the terrible poverty and harsh times in which the great fighters of the past lived. Jack Dempsey said late in his life, "Nobody has to go hungry today. There's plenty of work for a man who wants to work. A kid can make plenty of dough for himself doing almost anything. I was hungry. I had to fight my way along. Freights and the like. Fight all the time. The life was tough, but it hardened you." Yeah, there you have it. Yeah, that's why these fighters engaged in these 30, 40, and 50 round fights back in the day, because they were tough. They grew up tough. The living of their natural life was tough, you know? So, yeah. But nowadays, I mean, you're making $250,000 is C-level fighters making that nowadays, you know? You had to be a really, really big name to make the big money back in the day. That's why they fought so much and fought so often, because they had to make ends meet. And that's why they were tough. That's why they were able to fight these 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 110 rounds to fight. But yeah, tomorrow, don't forget, we're going to do like 4 people profiles tomorrow, short ones, so we can put them all in one day. And we're going to start out with Gunboat Smith himself. So be here early. We're going to take a look at the life and career of Gunboat Smith tomorrow. I wouldn't miss that one. Yeah, because we've been talking about Gunboat for a long time. And we're going to look at his career tomorrow. Let's see, what is Gunboat's real name before we go? I believe it's James. But he's going to be the first of the profile. We're going to do like 4 of them. Back from some more pioneers. Gunboat. And he was also an actor. Yeah, boxer and actor. Edward, okay. Starting out tomorrow with Edward Gunboat Smith. He was an Irish-American boxer. Tough guy. You better be tough, your nickname Gunboat, right? I think Al Booker told me he was actually in the Navy. That's where he got that name from. But we got to get out of here. Time for Just Do Boxing. Irony Boxing, Mike Mazik, Technique, Mike Grimm, The Drunk Irishman, Miss Cass. Appreciate y'all. Be here early tomorrow. Gunboat. Well, started out Edward Gunboat Smith, tough Irish American boxer. Okay, we're gonna have like 3 other profiles, short ones, and we're gonna put them all in. Yeah, there's the 2 guys that fought the 75-round fight, John O'Sullivan and Jake Kilrain. They both had them handlebar mustaches and stuff. They shaved them off for that fight because you could grab fighters and throw them down, and they wanted to give each other less to grab onto. That was the last Bare Knuckles championship fight. And John O'Sullivan won that one. He was the last Bare Knuckles champion and the first glove champion. Same man. Jake Kilrain never fought. He fought in the glove era, but he never fought for a title in the glove era. But yeah, 75 rounds fight by those 2 warriors. The fighters were just built different back then, man. I'm telling you. There was some tough stuff. Yeah. Like 75 rounds. They had the 110 rounder. Started on Thursday evening, ended on Friday morning. 7 hours, over 7 hours. They changed referees in the 90th round, and then they fought 20 more rounds. Okay? Almost 2 fights. Well, 94th round, something like that. 93rd, they fought 17 more rounds. Okay, but I appreciate everybody. Everybody have a great afternoon. Don't miss tomorrow. Gunboat Smith starting off the profiles. Everybody have a great afternoon.